They told him his music would never matter, that a blind man had no place in a world built on spectacle and image. The studio executive didn't even look at him when he said the words that shattered everything. "We need someone who can see the vision, Jacob. You just can't." 3 years later, that same executive would sit in a darkened theater, tears streaming down his face, listening to a symphony that would win an Academy Award. He had no idea it was composed by the man he had destroyed. This is the story of Jacob Mitchell, the blind musician who turned rejection into redemption and silence into the most powerful sound Hollywood had ever heard. Jacob Mitchell lost his sight when he was 7 years old. It wasn't a tragic accident or a heroic story. It was a rare genetic condition that slowly stole the world from his eyes. His parents, Margaret and Thomas, were school teachers in a small town outside of Manchester, England. They didn't have money for specialists or experimental treatments. All there was love and a beat-up piano that Thomas had inherited from his own father. On Jacob's 8th birthday, 6 months after the darkness had fully set in, his mother sat him down at that piano. She took his small hands in hers and placed them on the keys. "Close your eyes, sweetheart," she whispered, then laughed softly at her own words. "Well, you know what I mean. Just feel it. Feel the music." And Jacob did. His fingers found the keys like they were coming home. Within minutes, he was playing a melody, clumsy, imperfect, but achingly beautiful. Margaret stood behind him, her hand over her mouth, tears pouring down her face. She knew in that moment that her son had found his light in the darkness. But childhood wasn't kind to Jacob. School was a battlefield. The other children mocked him mercilessly. They'd move his chair so he'd fall. They'd hide his cane. They'd whisper cruel jokes just loud enough for him to hear. "Blind boy can't even see how pathetic he is," they'd say. Jacob would come home with bruises on his knees and tears he tried to hide. He never told his parents the full truth. He didn't want to add to their burdens. Instead, he'd go straight to the piano and pour everything, every ounce of pain, every moment of humiliation, into the keys. The music became his voice when words failed him. By the time Jacob was 16, he was composing full orchestral pieces in his head. He couldn't write them down in traditional notation, but he taught himself to use recording equipment and basic music software designed for visually impaired. His compositions were haunting, emotional, unlike anything his teachers had heard. One of them, Mrs. Patricia Holloway, believed in him so fiercely that she sent his recordings to every music conservatory in England. Most never replied, but one did. The Royal Academy of Music offered him a conditional acceptance, conditional on his ability to function in a professional environment. Jacob proved them all wrong. He graduated top of his class at 22 years old. His final thesis composition, a piece called Shadows and Light, was performed by the Academy's full orchestra. People in the audience wept. Critics called it transcendent. For the first time in his life, Jacob felt seen, truly seen, not despite his blindness, but because his music revealed what others couldn't see. That success opened doors. Jacob moved to London and started working for Meridian Sound Studios, one of the biggest production houses in Europe. They created music for films, television shows, commercials, everything. Jacob was hired as a junior composer, and he was grateful, so incredibly grateful. He worked 16-hour days, composing background music for corporate training videos and low-budget documentaries. He never complained. Every project was a chance to prove his worth. But here's what Jacob didn't know. Here's the part that would break him. The senior composers at Meridian were taking his work, his melodies, his arrangements, and passing them off as their own. They'd ask him to sketch out some ideas, and then they'd present those ideas to clients under their names. Jacob had no way of knowing. He couldn't see the credits on screen. He couldn't read the contracts they conveniently forgot to give him. He trusted them, and they betrayed him. For 3 years, Jacob's music won awards. Just not for Jacob. His compositions were featured in major ad campaigns, in indie films that went to festivals, in television series that became cult favorites. And every time, someone else's name was attached to it. The studio loved having him around. He was cheap talented and had no idea he was being exploited until Emma Richardson walked into Meridian Studios. Emma was a junior producer, fresh out of university, idealistic and sharp-eyed. She noticed something strange immediately. The senior composer, a man named Richard Ashford, was submitting work that sounded nothing like his previous style. She started asking questions. She started watching. And one day, she walked past Jacob's small studio in the basement and heard something that made her freeze. It was the exact melody that Richard had just presented in a meeting upstairs as his own work. 20 minutes earlier, Emma didn't say anything at first. She needed proof. So she started documenting everything, recording dates, file timestamps. She even secretly recorded one of Richard's meetings where he presented Jacob's work. It took her 2 months to build an airtight case. And then she walked into Jacob's studio and told him the truth. Jacob didn't believe her at first. He couldn't. It was too devastating. But Emma played in the recordings. She showed him, through audio descriptions, the credits on projects he'd worked on, where his name appeared nowhere. She showed him contracts he'd never been given a chance to properly review. And Jacob's world collapsed. All those years, all that work, all those pieces of his soul, stolen and sold. He confronted Richard the next day. He walked into that office with Emma by his side and demanded answers. Richard didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. "Jacob, you have to understand," he said, his voice smooth as oil. "This is a visual industry. Clients want to see their composer. They want someone who can be in the room, who can watch the film, who can understand the director's vision by looking at their face. You're talented, mate, truly, but you're not marketable." Jacob felt like he'd been punched in the chest. Marketable? I wrote every note of Autumn Dreams that won the Cannes Advertising Award last year. That was my work. Richard shrugged. "And you got paid for your time, didn't you?" "Look, Jacob, I'm not the villain here. I'm protecting you from an industry that would chew you up and spit you out. I gave you a job when no one else would." That's when the owner of Meridian Studios walked in. Daniel Foster was a man who valued profits over people, and he'd heard enough. "Jacob, I think it's time we had a conversation about your future here. Or rather, your lack of one. We're downsizing the junior composing team, and unfortunately, you're going to have to go." "You're firing me?" Jacob's voice was barely a whisper. "After everything I've given this place?" Daniel's voice was cold. "You're a liability, Jacob. We've been accommodating your situation for 3 years now. But the truth is, this industry needs composers who can see the vision. You just can't. We need someone who can be in the editing room, who can watch the rough cuts, who can collaborate face-to-face with directors. It's nothing personal." Emma exploded. "Nothing personal? You've been stealing his work for years. I have proof." "And if you share that proof anywhere, Miss Richardson," Daniel interrupted, "you'll find yourself in a legal battle that will bankrupt you before you finish your first sentence. We have very expensive lawyers. Now, both of you need to leave. Security will escort you out." Jacob walked out of Meridian Studios that day with Emma holding his arm and a cardboard box of his belongings in his hands. He didn't cry. He was too numb, too broken. Emma drove him home to his tiny flat in South London, and for 3 days, Jacob didn't leave his bed. He didn't eat. He didn't play a single note. The music inside him had gone silent. Emma refused to give up on him. She came to his flat every day with food, with encouragement, with a plan. "Jacob, listen to me," she said on the 4th day, sitting on the edge of his bed. "They didn't break you. They can't break you. Your music is still inside you, and the world needs to hear it. Not Richard's version. Not some studio's packaged product. Your voice. Your story." "What's the point, Emma?" Jacob's voice was hollow. "They were right. I can't see the film. I can't sit in a director's chair. I can't do what everyone else does." "No," Emma said firmly. "You do what no one else can do. You hear emotion. You feel stories in a way that people with sight never will. Your blindness isn't your weakness, Jacob. It's your superpower, and I'm going to help you prove it." Emma had an idea, a crazy, impossible idea. She'd been following an independent filmmaker in Los Angeles named Sarah Chun, who was crowdfunding her first feature film. Sarah was a nobody, no studio backing, no big names attached, Just a raw, beautiful script about a woman losing her memory and trying to hold on to the feeling of love. Emma reached out to Sarah on every platform she could find. She sent her Jacob's work, his real work, the pieces he composed under his own name during school. She told her Jacob's story. 3 weeks later, Sarah called. She had almost no budget. She could only pay Jacob $1,500 for an entire film score. It was insulting by industry standards. But Sarah said something that changed everything. I don't want someone who can see my film and write music for it. I want someone who can feel my film and write music with it. Emma says you're that person, Jacob. I'm taking a chance on you. Will you take a chance on me? Jacob took the chance. He moved to Los Angeles with Emma, who quit her job to become his manager and advocate. They lived in a cramped apartment in a rough neighborhood. Jacob set up a home studio with borrowed equipment. Sarah sent him the script. Emma read it aloud to him 3 times, and then Jacob asked her to describe every scene in painstaking detail. Not what it looked like, what it felt like, what the actors' voices conveyed, what the silence between words meant. And then Jacob composed. He didn't watch the rough cuts. He couldn't. Instead, Sarah would sit with him, describing the images while he played. They'd go back and forth, her painting pictures with words, him painting emotions with sound. It was a collaboration unlike anything either of them had experienced. Jacob wrote music that didn't just accompany the film. It breathed with it. It ached with it. It loved with it. Sarah's film, The Forgetting, premiered at the Sundance Film Festival. It was a tiny screening, maybe 60 people in the audience. But something magical happened. When the lights came up, nobody moved. They just sat there, crying, stunned by what they'd experienced. The film was beautiful, but it was a music, Jacob's music, that had reached inside their chests and squeezed their hearts. The reviews started pouring in. Critics couldn't stop talking about the score. The most emotionally devastating music in independent cinema this decade. One wrote, "A composer who doesn't need eyes to see straight into your soul," wrote another. Within weeks, The Forgetting became the surprise hit of the festival. It won the Audience Award and the Grand Jury Prize. And suddenly, everyone wanted to know, who is Jacob Mitchell? The calls started coming in. Real calls, from real producers and directors. Jacob was terrified. What if they found out about his blindness and changed their minds? But Emma had learned from Meridian. She was strategic. She set up meetings where Jacob's work spoke first. She'd send his demos before revealing anything about him. And by the time directors met Jacob in person, they were already in love with his music. Over the next 2 years, Jacob scored 6 independent films. Each one was more successful than the last. His style was unmistakable, deeply emotional, intimate, unafraid of silence. He had a way of making you feel like the music was coming from inside your own heart. And then came the call that would change everything. Michael Brennan was one of Hollywood's most celebrated directors. He'd made blockbusters, won Oscars, worked with every A-list composer in the business. He was developing a film called Echoes of Tomorrow, a science fiction drama about humanity's last days on Earth. He'd fired 2 composers already, both legends, because their music felt too polished, too perfect. Michael wanted something raw, something real, something that felt like grief, and hope had a baby. His music supervisor had played him Jacob's score for The Forgetting. Michael listened to it 3 times in a row, then said 5 words. "Find me this composer, now." When Emma told Jacob that Michael Brennan wanted to meet him, Jacob laughed. Then he panicked. Then he laughed again, because panic was all he had left. This was Michael Brennan. This was a $60 million film. This was the major leagues. And Jacob was a blind kid from Manchester who'd been fired from a studio that stole his work. The meeting was set for Michael's office in Burbank. Emma and Jacob flew out, and Jacob barely slept the night before. He kept thinking about what Daniel Foster had said. "You can't see the vision, Jacob." What if Michael felt the same way? What if this was just another setup for heartbreak? But when Jacob walked into that office, Michael Brennan did something unexpected. He stood up, walked around his desk, and sat down in the chair next to Jacob, not across from him, next to him. "Jacob," he said, his voice warm and genuine. "I'm not interested in someone who can see my film. I've had plenty of those. They gave me exactly what I asked for, and it was boring as hell. I want someone who can hear what I'm trying to say underneath all the explosions and special effects. Emma tells me you're that person. So let me ask you something. When you hear the words, 'the last sunrise humanity will ever see,' what do you feel?" Jacob was silent for a moment. Then he spoke, his voice quiet but steady. "I feel gratitude, not sadness. Because if you know it's the last one, you're not taking it for granted anymore. You're finally paying attention. The tragedy isn't that it's ending. The tragedy is that we waited until the end to really see it." Michael stared at him. Then he turned to his producer and said, "He's the one. Draw up the contracts." Jacob scored Echoes of Tomorrow over the next 8 months. It was the hardest work of his life. The film was massive in scope, battles, quiet moments, romance, devastation, hope. Michael would describe scenes to Jacob in exhaustive detail, but he also gave Jacob something no other director had: complete creative freedom. "I trust you," Michael said. "Show me what the end of the world sounds like through your ears." Jacob poured everything into that score. Every moment of pain from his childhood, every betrayal at Meridian, every fear that he wasn't enough, every hope that maybe, just maybe, his music mattered. He composed a symphony that swelled and broke and rebuilt itself, just like the human spirit. He used silence in ways that made people hold their breath. He used a single piano melody that recurred throughout the film like a heartbeat, fragile, persistent, refusing to stop. Echoes of Tomorrow premiered in Hollywood with a red carpet, searchlights, and every major star in attendance. Jacob stood outside the theater in his best suit, Emma by his side, and he felt like he was going to be sick. "What if they hate it?" he whispered. "What if I ruin Michael's film?" Emma squeezed his hand. "Then we'll figure it out. But Jacob, you didn't ruin anything. You saved it." The lights went down. The film began. And for 2 hours and 15 minutes, Jacob sat in that theater listening to his music, played through a world-class sound system, surrounded by an audience of thousands. He couldn't see their faces, but he could hear their reactions. The gasps, the sniffles, the stunned silence during the final scene, where his piano melody played over the last sunrise, and the screen went to black. When the credits rolled and Jacob's name appeared, music by Jacob Mitchell, the theater erupted in applause. But it wasn't polite applause. It was a standing ovation that went on for 5 full minutes. Michael pulled Jacob up onto the stage, and the applause grew louder. People were crying. Producers were shaking his hand. Composers, legendary composers Jacob had idolized his whole life, were telling him it was the best score they'd heard in a decade. And then, in the crowd, Jacob heard a voice he recognized, a voice that made his blood run cold. Incredible, just incredible. I had no idea Mitchell had this in him. It was Daniel Foster, the man who'd fired him, the man who'd told him he could never succeed because he couldn't see the vision. Emma saw him too. She wanted to say something to confront him, but Jacob grabbed her arm. "No," he whispered. "Let it go. He doesn't matter anymore." But Daniel made his way over anyway, hand extended. "Jacob, my God, what a triumph. Listen, I've always believed in your talent. We should talk about future projects." Jacob didn't shake his hand. He just smiled a sad, knowing smile. "Mr. Foster, I appreciate the sentiment, but I don't work with people who see me as a liability. I work with people who see me as an artist, and I finally found them." He turned away, and Emma guided him toward Michael and Sarah, who were waiting with champagne and genuine love. Echoes of Tomorrow became one of the highest-grossing films of the year. Critics called Jacob's score a masterpiece, transcendent the soul of film. It was nominated for every major award. And on a cold February night, Jacob Mitchell sat in the Dolby Theater in Los Angeles, wearing a tuxedo his mother had helped him pick out over FaceTime, as they announced the Academy Award for Best Original Score. And the Oscar goes to Jacob Mitchell, Echoes of Tomorrow. The room exploded. Emma was sobbing. Michael was cheering. And Jacob walked up to that stage, his cane in one hand, feeling the weight of the golden statue placed in his other hand. He stood at the microphone, and for a moment, He couldn't speak. The emotion was too much. Then he found his voice. "I can't see you," he began, his voice shaking. "But I can feel you. I can hear you." And that's been my whole life. When I was a kid, people told me I'd never belong in this world because I couldn't see it. But here's what I learned. Music isn't about what you see. It's about what you feel. It's about the moments that break you and rebuild you. It's about the people who believe in you when you can't believe in yourself. His voice cracked. "This award isn't just mine. It belongs to my mom and dad, who taught me that darkness doesn't mean the end of light. It belongs to Emma Richardson, who risked everything to give me a chance. It belongs to Sarah Chun and Michael Brennan, who saw past my blindness to the music inside me. And it belongs to everyone who's ever been told they don't belong. You do. Your voice matters. Your story matters. Don't let anyone tell you that you can't see the vision. Sometimes the greatest visions come from those who see with their hearts." The standing ovation that followed lasted so long, they had to cut to a commercial break. Jacob stood there, clutching that Oscar, tears streaming down his face, and for the first time in his life, he felt completely, utterly whole. 6 months later, Jacob opened the Mitchell Foundation for Young Musicians with Disabilities. He uses earnings from Hollywood to provide instruments, training, and opportunities for kids who've been told they couldn't make it. Emma ran it with him, and Sarah served on the board. Every year, they held a concert where these young musicians performed. And every year, Jacob composed a new piece specifically for them, a reminder that their differences weren't weaknesses. They were superpowers. Jacob went on to score 23 more films. He won 2 more Academy Awards. He collaborated with orchestras around the world. He married Emma in a small ceremony in Manchester, with his parents and a piano playing his own composition. And he never, ever forgot where he came from. Years later, a young journalist asked him, "Do you ever wish you could see? Do you ever wonder what your life would have been like if you hadn't lost your sight?" Jacob was quiet for a long moment. Then he smiled. "I used to," he said, "every single day. But now, I think I see more than most people ever will. I see kindness. I see possibility. I see the beauty in what others overlook. My blindness didn't take the world from me. It gave me a different way to experience it. And I wouldn't trade that for anything. Because Jacob Mitchell didn't need eyes to see the vision. He had something far more powerful. He had music. He had heart. And he had the courage to prove that the greatest limitations exist only in the minds of those who refuse to look deeper. His story is a reminder to all of us. When the world tells you that you're not enough, that you don't fit, that you can't see the vision, remember Jacob. Remember that sometimes the most beautiful music comes from the darkest places. Remember that your struggles don't define you. How you rise from them does. And remember that you are never, ever a liability. You are a masterpiece waiting to be heard.